Welcome back. We are now in Unit 9, Fund Governance. This is part of our class of business, Class 4, Retirement Benefits. Introduction to this unit, Unit 9, evaluates the selection of service providers in line with fund governance principles. No study of fund governance could even commence without consulting PF Circular 130. PF 130 contains general guidelines regarding the governance of retirement funds. According to this circular, the purpose of good governance is to ensure that 1. The benefits provided for in terms of the rules of the funds are delivered, the benefits are optimized, and associated investment risks are minimized, with these opposing concepts being appropriately balanced against each other, and the process involved in the provision of benefits and administration of the funds warrant the cost implication to members and the beneficiaries are transparent and quantifiable by the stakeholders. The retirement fund industry has several scandals internationally. These have exposed the trustees, the custodians of large sums of money in retirement funds to lawsuits. It is so because the fund members and the retirees blame these trustees for negligence and lack of foresight in putting in place prudential standards by which their monies should be managed. At the heart of governance is the concept of sustainable development. Sustainable development is responsible for conducting day-to-day operations without hindering the future generations of the business. It is imperative that retirement funds, as the custodians of billions invested in the economy, influence environmental, social, and economic challenges facing the country and our world at large. Right, if we look at a good governance structure, it should include at least the establishment of policies, number 1, monitoring systems, risk management strategy, governance structures, global objectives, and strategy to achieve all of these goals. Now, you'll find a PF 130, the whole document, on the FSCA website. You can go and look for it there on fund governance, PF 130, which is a very important document that you need to read through. What does fund governance entail? Retirement fund governance is a subset of corporate governance. The same governance principles that apply to the corporates should apply to the management of pension assets. Governance of funds involve the managerial control of the organization and how they are regulated, including the accountability of service providers and how they are supervised. The 4 pillars below should form the basis of any government structure and mechanism. Number 1 is organizational coherence, which provide clarity of purpose, structure of the governing board, proper allocation and development of resources. Then people, which include qualities, skills, competencies, recruitment, remuneration practices, and protection. Processes, there should be general decision-making processes, investment decision-making processes, and then accountability mechanisms such as whistleblowing, service provider mandates, and agreements. The basic goal of retirement fund governance is to minimize the potential agency problems or conflict of interest that can arise between the fund members and those responsible for the fund management, which can adversely affect the security of retirement fund savings and promises. Good governance also goes a long way in achieving the following: A, delivering high retirement fund performance while keeping costs low for all stakeholders. B, creating trust amongst all stakeholders. C, reducing the need for prospective regulation and facilitating supervision. D, positive collateral effects on economy-wide efficiency, strengthening the fund's role as effective shareholders. E, enhancing investment performance and benefit security. And F, ensure trustees act in the best interest of the fund and its members. What is the purpose of fund governance? And that is to ensure that, number one, benefits promised in the rules to the fund are currently delivered and actually delivered. Those benefits are optimal and the associated risks are minimized with these contradictory concepts appropriately balanced. The process involved in providing these benefits justifies the cost and is transparent to the stakeholders. And the process of delivering these benefits is credible. For example, a demonstrable trustworthiness process of benefit delivery. The fund governance principles are based on three broad areas. The first is governance of the Board of Trustees. The second one is governance of the fund's business. And then the third one is management of relationships. Tools that can be used by trustees to enhance fund governance: trustees code of conduct, conflict of interest declaration policy, experience management policy is another one, risk management policy, investment policy statement or IPS, a trustee training policy, communication policy, and then obviously a fund procurement policy. So these are 2, 4, 6, 8 tools that we can give you that will help in fund governance. The King 4 Code of Conduct also gives aspects relevant to fund governance. The King 4 Report on Corporate Governance for South Africa, or King 4 short, became effective on the 1st of April of 2017. King 4 set out recommendations and guidelines for governance in South Africa, but has been adopted by many other countries worldwide. King 4 reduced the 75 principles that were set out in King 3 to only 17. There was 4 King reports. That's why we now at King 4. It was King 1, 2, and then 3, and now 4 that has reduced it to 17. Entities must exercise the apply and explain principle, unlike the King Code 3, which provides an apply or explain principle. King 4 provides a supplementary focus entirely on retirement funds amongst other sectors, given the prominent role that retirement funds play in the institutional investor industry and the economy. Retirement funds are crucial in the entire governance structure of the economy and principally for two reasons. One, when making investment decisions, and two, as shareholders in majority of companies on the stock markets. How investments and shareholder decisions are made has enormous implications on how the governance structures and directions of the economy go. Principles like BBBEE could therefore be effectively implemented by pension funds and impact the economy. Trustees have a fiduciary duty to their members to ensure that investments and the companies in which they invest are well governed, and that the principles of responsible investing are applied to ensure positive and substantial and sustainable returns. Retirement funds can effectively transform the narrative in the governance of pension funds and other organizations by implementing an oversight role in the entire economy to ensure that long-term interests and of the members and communities they represent are protected and advanced. Right, if we look at the King Code 4 and we look at the principles as summarized, Principle 1, the Board of Trustees should lead ethically and effectively. Principle 2, the Board of Trustees should govern the fund's ethics to support establishing an ethical culture. Principle 3, the Board of Trustees should ensure that the fund is considered a responsible corporate citizen. Principle 4, the Board of Trustees should appreciate that the fund's core purpose, risks and opportunities, strategy, business model, performance, and sustainable development are all inseparable elements of the value creation process. Principle 5, the Board of Trustees should ensure that reports issued by the fund enable stakeholders to make informed assessments of the fund's performance and its short, medium, and long-term prospects. Principle number 7, the Board of Trustees should serve as a fund focal point and custodian of corporate governance. Principle 7, the Board of Trustees should comprise the appropriate balance of knowledge, skill, experience, diversity, and independence to execute its governance role and responsibility objectively and effectively. Principle 8, the Board of Trustees should ensure that its arrangements for delegation within its structures promote independent judgment and assist with balancing powers and effective execution of its duties. Principle 9, the Board of Trustees should ensure that the evaluation of its performance and that of its committees, its chair, and its members support continued improvement in its performance and effectiveness. Principle 10, the Board of Trustees should ensure that appointing and delegating to management contribute to the role of clarity and the effective exercise of authority and responsibility. Principle 11, the Board of Trustees should govern risks to support the fund and setting and achieving the strategic objectives. Principle 12, the Board of Trustees should govern technology and information to support the fund setting and achieving its strategic objectives. Principle 13, the Board of Trustees should govern compliance with applicable laws and adopt non-binding rules, codes, and standards to support the fund being an ethical and responsible corporate citizen. Principle 14, the Board of Trustees should ensure that the fund remunerates fairly, responsibly, and transparently to promote the achievement of strategic objectives and positive outcomes in the short, medium, and long term. Principle 15, the Board of Trustees should ensure that assurance fosters an effective control environment, supporting the integrity of information for internal decision making and funds external reports. Principle 16, in executing its governance role and responsibility, the Board of Trustees should adopt a stakeholder inclusive approach that balances the needs, the interests, and expectations of material stakeholders in the best interest of the fund. And then the final principle here, principle 17, the Board of Trustees should ensure that the fund practices responsible investing to promote good governance and value creation by companies in which it invests. Aren't you glad that they've reduced the 75 principles to only 17? Otherwise, we would have been here much longer. Right, the key issues for the King 4 report is 1, it may moved away from boxed ticking to a mindful application rather, understand why we do what we do. 2, a value addition, implementation to achieve results, not just compliance. And 3, explain how it is applicable in the direct scenarios considering the different organizations. Right, governance principles that the board should observe are the following. The South African Financial Services Board, now the FSCA, has developed the following fund governance principles that have been acclaimed worldwide as the pinnacle of good fund governance. Attain a complete understanding of Pension Fund Circular 130 and its practical applications for the client. Through Pension Fund Circular 130, the registrar focuses on the governance principles of retirement funds by directing trustees to follow a more formal governance process and recognizing that governance includes values and ethical principles which require a certain standard of behavior of the board. The guidance provided throughout Pension Fund Circular 130 relates to the objects and the duties of the Board of Trustees as seen in Unit 2 we discussed earlier, The objects and duties of the boards are set out in terms of Section 7C and 7D of the Pension Fund Act. And when reading PF 130, these should always be kept in mind. Right, Section 7C, if we look at the object of the board's object shall be to direct, control, and oversee the operations of the fund in accordance with the applicable laws and the rules of the fund. The board, in pursuing its objectives, shall 1. Act in the interest of members at all times, act with due care, diligence, and in good faith, avoid conflicts of interest, and act with impartiality in respect of all members and beneficiaries. If we look at Section 7D, the duties of the board's duties of management are to ensure proper registers, books, and records of operations are kept, including all minutes and resolutions passed by the board, ensure that proper control systems are in place, ensure that adequate and appropriate information is communicated to members of the fund, informing them of their rights, benefits, and duties in terms of the fund, take all reasonable steps to ensure that contributions are made to the fund timeously, obtain expert advice on matters where the board may lack the expertise, and finally, ensure that the fund acts in accordance with all applicable laws. The preamble to PF 130. The preamble to PF 130 specifically deals with discipline, accountability, and the responsibility principles. The board and the principal officer are accountable for the fund's governance and need to ensure that the fund's objectives are met. The preamble emphasizes the duty of the trustees to act with utmost good faith towards the fund and in the best interest of all its members. The preamble introduces us to 4 recommendation documents that is envisioned that all retirement funds should have, namely 1, an investment policy statement or IPS, a code of conduct, communication policy, and a risk management policy. Reference to each of these documents should be made in the fund's annual financial statements. PF 130, the circular, as it stands and it reads, PF 130 is a lengthy document. It contains 13 detailed principles which are split into 3 sections. The sections are as follows, and we'll discuss all these 13 detailed principles. Number 1 is governance by the board. Number 2 is governance by the board and the operations of the fund, and then management of stakeholder relationships. So in the next slide, we will deal then with the 13 detailed principles. Right, if we look at the governance of the board, and there's principle 1 to 4, the roles and the responsibilities and accountability of the board governance structure, the the composition and competency of the board and delegation to subcommittees, the board's orientation and education, and then the 4th principle, the board's assessment and breach of code of conduct. The governance of the board and the operations of the fund, which falls under principles 5 to 8, the internal controls, governance mechanisms, expert advisors, risk management, and the investment performance of the fund's assets. And then under management of stakeholder relationships, that falls under principles 9 to 13, which is communication and access to information, members and beneficiary protection of rights, employers and sponsors, appointment or appointing of service providers, and then regulatory authorities and effective supervision. I again would suggest that you go to the FSCA's website and go and look for this PF 130 circular and download this as this form one of the most important documents when it comes to the governance of pension funds and the responsibilities of the trustees. This then concludes our session on fund governance. We will then move on to Unit 10, where we will look at insurance arrangements of a fund. So thank you for attending this session. I'll see you then in Unit 10 when we discuss insurance arrangements of a fund. Thank you very much.